So in this month's Get That Sound, we're going to look at Avicii's levels and how to produce the lead sound and the associated sounds around it, which give the track so much character. So what I've got here, first of all, is the lead part, which I've sequenced the notes for. So if we open this up, then we'll be able to see the note sequence down here at the bottom. So that's the lead part playing there. But at the moment, I haven't got a sound for it. So what I've done is to load a template sound from within Logic's ES2 synth, which sounds very basic at the moment. So we'll build the sound up from this point. So let's just have a quick listen to the track as it sounds at the moment. Okay, so obviously not sounding anything like the original at the moment. So let's start looking at how we can build the sound. What I actually need is a 2 oscillator synthesizer. So what I'm going to do first of all is to switch on the 3rd oscillator here, and I'm going to set the waveforms as I need them. I need sawtooth waves in both parts, that's fine. I'm going to set a balance between them just by doing this as well. So setting the balance between the two so they're roughly equal. And then we're in a position to tune the parts as well. So what I'm going to do next is to add a bit of detune to each of the 2 oscillators. So let's just add 8 plus cents there and 8 minus cents here. So we've got a little bit of bend in the sound, a little bit of detune, and that's working nicely. What I'm also going to do is to turn up the analog setting, which gives me a little bit of random pitch, so a bit more like sort of classic retro synths there. So that's just going to give me a little bit more sort of flavour within the sound, and that should work for us nicely as well. And then what I'm going to do is to detune these 2 oscillators down an octave, because you can hear at the moment they're both very thin and reedy. So let's just turn those down an octave too. Now, as far as filter settings are concerned, the sound within levels is really nice and bright. So I'm going to need the filter wide open. I only need a low pass filter here, but I'm going to add a little bit of resonance, and I'm also going to use this fat option here within the filter as well, just to give me sort of some extra sort of bite within the filter routing as it stands at the moment. Now, I don't need any of the effects within the ES2, so I'm going to remove all of those and just turn those down altogether. That's fine, but we do need to start looking at envelope shaping to make sure that the sound's doing what it should. So the first thing I'm going to do is to feed, as the default sound does, a little bit of envelope 2, so the envelope down here, into the filter section, and I'm going to slightly reduce that. So there's not quite as much bite on the sound, but I don't need LFO control over the pitch. So from this default sound, I can remove that altogether. And similarly, I'm not going to use the mod wheel, so I'm going to get rid of that too, so that that's out of the way. So in terms of the sort of bite on the sound, what I'm going to need in terms of envelope shaping is pretty much what I've got at the moment. I'm going to slightly bring down the release time on envelope number 2 as far as the filter is concerned. But as far as the attack of the sound in terms of volume is concerned, I want a nice fast attack, sort of medium decay, and maybe a bit less sustain level here as well. And then we should be a bit closer to where we need to be as far as the sound's concerned. So let's have a listen to it now and see how it's changed from that first template sound that we began with. Okay, so that's working much better now. However, the original part within levels requires us to duplicate this part and to turn it up an octave as well, tune it up an octave. So what I'm going to do is to close this down, and I'm then going to duplicate the entire part. So the sound that I've just created has just been duplicated. And what I can then do is to copy this part down, and then I can apply my octave up transposition. So that's working a little better now, and you can see that the settings here are the same across the board, so we're in good shape. However, because this is a mono part, I'm going to turn this into a mono synth, and I'm going to do that for both sounds. And that should help the part too. However, at this stage, both parts are sounding incredibly dry. So the next thing I'm going to do is to set up bus number 1. And here I'm going to apply some reverb. I'm going to have quite a lot of reverb here, and I'm going to use the Sonox reverb, but any bright sounding plate will do. Something nice and big and echoey. So I'm going to come into the hall setting, and I'm going to select this big wet hall sound, and we'll see what that sounds like. So let's just apply that to the other part as well. And have a listen. So that's working nicely. It's, if anything, a little too bright though. So what I'm going to do is to switch on the equalizer section of this plugin. And what we'll do is to bring down the amount of treble in the sound and make the bandwidth of this a little wider so that we're chopping more out of the part. And the same thing as well up here. Let's just put a sort of a high shelf in here and reduce the amount of treble in the sound so it's not quite so ringy. Okay, that's working nicely. It's giving us a nice sort of sawtooth character, but actually the sound in levels is made up of another part as well, which is a bit more square wave based. So I'm going to set up another track, and this time I'm going to turn to the synth by Yuhi. And again, I don't want to start from this sort of preset starting point, so I'm going to go and find a sort of tutorial patch instead. And we can use this sort of template sound to begin with. And we'll go for just a sort of basic PWM sound to begin with, so that we've got a nice template to work to. So if we come back into the synth settings here, what I'm then in a position to do is to start thinking about how I want to tweak this part so that it can provide a mirror image, but a more square wave based one of the sawtooth sound that we set up with the ES2. So the first thing to do is I'm going to mute these two original parts, and I'm going to bring this original lower octave part down to here, and then open up the instrument and begin to make the changes that we need. Now, I'm not going to be using the LFOs in the same way that we switched those off within the ES2. I'm not going to need them here either. So let's just get rid of their levels altogether and turn them right down. And let's do the same thing here as well within the second LFO. Now, in terms of the oscillators, what I do need is this square wave. So I'm going to leave this in the position where it is at the moment and set a nice amount of pulse width here too. And let's just be absolutely sure, switch off the LFO routing from this sound so that it's not being used at all. Now, I also want some detune within this sound, but I don't want to obviously tune in semitones. I want to choose in cents. So I'm just going to toggle that across and turn the cents down a little bit, again, sort of 8-ish, a bit like we had within the ES2. Now, within oscillator 2, again, I've got the same thing. I don't want any LFO movement, so let's get rid of that. I want the same waveform here, so that's fine. And again, I want a little bit of detune here as well, but this time we're going to come up to 8, and that should suit us nicely. Let's just turn this up a little bit too. And so now we've got a sort of basic sound from an oscillator point of view, which should be providing a nice sort of square wave accompaniment to the sawtooth wave. Let's just hear the sound in isolation at the moment. Okay, so that's working nicely. What I'm then going to do, however, is to start thinking about envelope routing within this sound as well. So the first thing I want to do is to feed this envelope into the main mix section. So I'm just going to cable this here. And we're not going to need an enormous amount of envelopes. Let's just reduce the amount of that a little bit. And now we've got a nice little balance, a little bit of envelope shaping into the actual mix. Let's just boost this just a little bit. Now in terms of cutoff routing, this is all fine. I want a nice bright sound again, but I also want to add a little key follow so that as I play higher up the keyboard, the notes get brighter. And as far as the cutoff in filter 2 is concerned, let's just drop this a little bit. And that should give us pretty much what we need. But I also want the envelope here to be affected by velocity. So let's just turn this up a fair amount. And slightly reduce the decay time on this envelope as well. And now let's have a listen to that. Okay, so that's working really nicely, and I think as an accompaniment to the sawtooth waves that will work well. But again, I've got the same issue here. I want to double this part so that it's also playing up the octave. So let's just adjust that too. So again, I've duplicated the part, taking it up the octave, and again, we're going to want that same reverb to be applied to this sound as well. Okay, let's have a listen to that now. Okay, that's working well. Now for me, the balance isn't quite right. We've got too much of Ace and not enough of the ES2. So let's grab these two tracks and just bring the volume down. Obviously, we can make further volume adjustments in a little while. Now the next part within this, this sound, which is so crucial, is this stab synth part. And what I've done is to pre-prepare this. So we've got an ES2 patch, again, very sawtooth wave based. We can have a look at the sound here and we can see the... Let's just drag this across. We can see again that the sawtooth waves are being used to provide this nice buzzy sort of sound. And underneath the lead sound, it's providing this chord part. So let's hear it by itself to start with. Okay, so that plays the same pattern the whole way through. And then let's listen to it with the leads. And that's working well. So what we've now got is this stab part underneath. But as you can hear in the track, there's a sort of tacky piano part as well that's playing underneath just to provide some extra definition in those chords. So again, what I'm going to do is just set up a new track here. Let's have a new software instrument. And I'm going to copy this part down to that instrument. And we're going to set up a piano. Now, almost any piano will do, because the way that we're going to process this means that very soon it won't sound much like a piano. So I'm going to just grab a factory preset piano from Logic's EXS24 library. So let's start with this grand piano part. And let's just solo it and listen to it as it stands at the moment. So it sounds like that to start with, but what we're going to do is to make it a really mid-rangey piano by opening up an EQ plugin and scooping out all of the bass in the sound. Let's just take plenty of this out, and we're also going to take out plenty of the top as well. And at the same time, we're going to boost frequencies in and around the middle, just to give it some extra bite and definition here. So there's an EQ setting. Let's have a listen to that. And immediately it's much thinner. And what I'm also going to do with this piano is to compress it to give it extra bite on the front of the sound. So set up a nice, generous amount of ratio. Drop the threshold so that plenty of the sound's being compressed, and then obviously we can adjust the gain to taste in a second. And that's working better. Let's try that with the stabs now as well, so we can hear those two parts together. Okay, and let's also feed both of those sounds into the reverb and hear it with the leads. Okay, and I think both those sounds are a little loud at the moment, so let's just bring them down. Now, another huge part of the sound is obviously the sidechain compression, which you can hear really clearly in the original. And what I've done is to prepare a beat loop, which is sitting here, which is coming from Stylus RMX. Let's just have a listen to that at the moment. The sounds of these don't matter so much. It's much more about what we can do with this pattern to use as a sidechain trigger. But let's just hear how it sounds at the moment. So this is just a preset loop that I've dragged in, but all we really need is the kicks and the snares. So what I'm going to do is to go through this part, and you can see that I've already selected these intervening notes here on the eighth notes. I'm just going to knock those out and remove them all together. And then what I'm going to do is to chop this first bar, because that's the only bar that we need. And then what I'm going to do is to loop this pattern so that it plays the whole way through the track. So now we've got a looped pattern playing underneath, but only the kicks and the snares. That's working well. Now, as I said before, we don't actually need this drum loop, but we do need it to act as a sidechain trigger for us. So what I'm going to do is to route it to bus number 2, so that it's being sent direct to an auxiliary, and at that auxiliary what I'm going to do is to switch off the output. And what that means now is that the drum loop will play, and it's being used internally in this way, but we're just not hearing it anymore, and that's exactly what we want. And the reason we want that becomes clear when we come back into the mixer. What I'm going to do is to select all of the parts that aren't the drum loop, and I'm going to send them direct to bus number 3. So basically they're all being grouped together now over here at auxiliary bus number 3. Now on auxiliary bus number 3, I'm going to set up a compressor. And I'm going to set its sidechain source so that it's receiving a signal from bus number 2, which of course is where the drum loop is being sent. So what this now means is that every time the drum loop plays, the compressor will react to the incoming signal from the drum loop, rather than just simply looking at the sounds that are being sent here and treating those in a way that a compressor normally would. So I'm going to increase the ratio so we get lots of sidechain, and I'm also going to drop the threshold so that the entire sound is affected. And again, I'm going to be in a position to affect gain in a second when I can see what the levels are looking like. So now we've got the drum loop affecting the compressor here. Let's have a listen. And you can see and hear that compressor working really nicely there to provide this sort of pump in the sound, which is so characteristic in the original. So what we've now got is a nice sort of sound that's working well together, but I'm going to switch off all of these auxiliaries, because now that the sounds are being grouped in this way, what I'm going to do instead is to send that auxiliary reverb send direct from this bus, which basically means that the same amount of reverb will be applied to all of the synth sounds. Let's try that again now. Okay, that's working well too. However, what we don't have is the little pitch sweeps that are so characteristic within the sound as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is to just close this plugin down for a second, and I'm going to remove the adaptive limiter by bypassing that. And what I'm then going to do is to bounce this part down to create a new audio file. Now I want to create a nice full frequency file, and I'm going to add this into my audio window, and I'm going to just call this levels. And we'll do a real-time bounce. But the only thing is that I haven't left any space at the end of the track, so I'm just going to increase the bounce length there, just to give us an extra couple of bars on the end, and that will now bounce through for us. Let's have a listen. Okay, so there's our bounce, which with any luck, we'll be able to drag in now from the media browser. And we can just put this over here so it's out of the way of the rest of the MIDI. We can now mute all of these parts and just check that this is sounding the way that we want it to. Bring the adaptive limiter back in now. Okay, so that's sounding the way we want it to, but what we now need to do is to chop this file up so we can create the little pitch sweeps, which sound like record stops, within this file. So let's just find the points where we want that to happen and create those chops. So the first one comes back in here. We're going to throw the two notes away on the end altogether because we don't need them. And what I've done is to put chops where the part comes back in after these sweeps that we're about to create, these pitch sweeps. So what I'm going to do is to select all of these regions. And then what I'm going to do is to select a fade out and change that to a slow down. And I suspect that about 300 milliseconds or so will do it. So what this is now going to do is to create these little orange fades, which are slow downs within the track. And when we listen to this through, we'll hear the record stopping as it plays. And we need one on the end there as well. And what I'm actually going to do is, again, just change that for slow down. I'm going to slightly increase the length on those to 350 milliseconds, and then I think we'll be there. Okay, and there we have it. So that's how you might set about creating the sound from levels.